2022 was a great improvement of film over what the past few years have brought us. And while I may not have got around to every film I was hoping to see this year, I still managed to get around to 34 movies which were released this year in 2022. So let's get into my ranking and let me know down below what your ranking would be. Now, before we get into it, there are some movies that I was really wanting to see but I didn't get around to seeing, so ultimately they will not be included in this list. Those being Nope, The Banshees of Inisherin, Triple R, Tar, Barbarian, The Northman, The Woman King, The Black Phone, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and The Whale. In last place, I have, to no surprise, Morbius. This movie, it is certainly one of the movies I've watched in my lifetime, and that's really all I have to say about it. I had higher expectations going into it than I believe most people did, which were ultimately shattered within the first 10 minutes of this film. It did have a few bright points, such as that Milo dancing scene. I actually thought that was pretty entertaining. It made me laugh a little bit, but ultimately this film fell flat at the end of the day. Amsterdam. Another movie where my expectations, I think they were higher than most people. It had a stacked cast with the likes of Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, and John David Washington all leading the way, but they weren't enough to save this movie from the hellhole it was put into right from the start. It doesn't help also that David O. Russell, the director of this film, he's had many controversies. I'm not going to get into those, but he's had many controversies leading up to this. And he has made many good movies over the past decade, but this one fell flat right from the start and it just never got back up from where it started. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Rodrick rules. This is the first animated film on this list. It's a follow-up to last year's Diary of a Wimpy Kid animated film, and it was as dull as the first one. I believe that instead of movies with these, they should make the books into, like, if they're doing animation, make it into a TV show instead, just a 17 episode TV show. I think that would be a lot better. And just leave the movies to the live action stuff. The live action Wimpy Kid stuff was good if we get rid of the long haul. But don't go with the animation. If you're wanting to watch Rodrick Rules, watch the real one. Don't watch this. Just skip this entirely. Now, this is a movie where I believe maybe a controversial placement, having Turning Red this low. But to me, it was just very bizarre from the get-go. And at the end, I was just sat there wondering what I had just watched. I remember while I was watching this, I said out loud, "What the fuck is this?" I was just watching it and I didn't get it. I didn't get the point. It was just that bizarre and I was really disappointed in it. Really, the only bright side was the animation. Pixar animation, it was always beautiful. And really, that's the only piece of this movie that I truly did enjoy. Armageddon Time is a movie where, from the start, it really seemed to have no real sense of direction to where it was going. And by the end, when I was walking out of the theater, which I went opening night and there were 10 people in the theater. It was the only theater in my city showing it. It was opening night, 10 people. And I was just walking out wondering what was truly the point of this movie. The acting was a bright point of this film, and the message they were trying to convey, that it was there, but they didn't do it in a way that made it fully understandable for the first 3/4 of the film, and ultimately that's what has it ranked so low. If they made it more understandable from the start, maybe they would have had it a bit higher. Lightyear is a movie that I was very excited for going into this year. It's a new Pixar film, a part of Toy Story. What could go wrong? Well, I was wrong. Was this movie bad? No, but it wasn't good either. It seemed like Pixar was told they were kind of needing to make a Lightyear movie, and they kind of just chucked something together last minute. I was also really disappointed that they didn't bring back Tim Allen to play Buzz. It's like, I get it. And Chris Evans was a great Buzz Lightyear, but you can't replace Tim Allen. And this movie just felt like something that a 10-year-old had written up as like a school project and was given to the animators as something to animate. The animation is really the only bright side of this film. Now, Spirited, I actually did really enjoy this movie. I loved the comedy. I loved the acting by Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell. But unfortunately, a musical just doesn't sit right with me. And to me, that's the wrong decision. I know lots of people like musicals. Me, I'm not one of those people. And the musical factor is what ultimately left a sour taste in my mouth after I was watching it. If they had got rid of the musical aspect, I think it would have been a much better film. I liked the story behind it, the idea behind it, but every time the musical sequences would come up, I'd just be sitting in my chair just like, not again. I just think it was too much. Like, it's a musical, but shouldn't have been a musical. Uncharted was actually the first movie I went to see in theaters this year. I had barely even really gone to the theater much over the past few years, and this year kind of just exploded with Uncharted starting all that. And it actually, while it did exceed my expectations compared to other releases this year, that's what sits it so low on this list. It just wasn't on par with the rest of them. Tom Holland, he proved why he's one of my favorite actors in Hollywood right now. He's one of my probably top 5 favorite actors. I do maybe have some Spider-Man bias there. And he was a big, bright piece of this film. He portrayed Nathan Drake perfectly. And I thought that the end credit scene in this movie set up a sequel perfectly, which I truly do hope that they end up making. But at the end, it just left a bit more to be desired. And hopefully the sequel will improve on it if they do indeed make a sequel. Thor Love and Thunder. This is a film that I really wanted to fully appreciate. Especially after how much of a success Ragnarok was. And with Taika Waititi returning as the director, I didn't really think it could go wrong. But unfortunately, it did not fulfill my hopes. They focused too much on humor, which while I don't mind, when it takes away from your story, you have a problem. They focused just too much on that, not enough on the story. And while Christian Bale was a nice addition as Gore, it wasn't the right role for him. Christian Bale, he nails any role, but he couldn't save this film from being at the bottom tier of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I believe I enjoyed Halloween Ends more than most people did, and that may be due to the fact that it was the first Halloween film I've ever seen. I hadn't seen any of the prior films going into it, which could be a factor that plays into this. So instead of basing it on the rest of the film, I saw it more as a standalone film than my first one part of the series, so I didn't have as much connection to the characters or anything. And me personally, I thought it was a good way to end off a franchise which has been around for decades, but it wasn't as scary as I had hoped it to be. I was pretty much sitting in my seat. I didn't get jump scared, didn't get scared or anything. And the lack of Michael Myers, that was another disappointing thing, but it wasn't as disappointing to me as it was to others. I did think Corey was a solid villain, and I think this film may have been better if it was its own film and not part of the Halloween franchise overall. While Guardians of the Galaxy The Holiday Special may not be your traditional film per se, Google is still considering it as a TV film, which is the whole reason I've still included it on this list. I thought it was an interesting idea and I was excited to see what James Gunn would do with this, but ultimately he left me disappointed. While he was dealt an iffy hand to begin with, as it not being a traditional film, it being about a 45-minute holiday TV special. I found it weird, just the premise of it just being Drax and Mantis searching for Kevin Bacon, of all actors, as a gift for Peter. I did like how it wasn't just its own thing, and it actually introduced new aspects into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm very excited to see what they do to improve on those in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which comes out in about 5 months. That is one of my most anticipated films of the year for 2023. I will have a video on those. Make sure you watch out for that. Make sure you subscribe. But ultimately, I wasn't super duper pleased with the holiday special. When I first saw DC League of Super Pets, I'd actually said it was the best animated film of 2022. But I think there was a bit of recency bias there after having just walked out of the theater, and I was a little off there. While the movie was very enjoyable and made me smile the whole way, it was very, very predictable. From the start, I knew what the entire plot would be. I could tell what the entire ending would be. And while I was hoping to be wrong and be surprised, the predictability factor was the ultimate downfall of this film and knocked it a few spots back on my ranking. While I did thoroughly enjoy the movie, I just wanted less predictability at the end of the day. Now this, Minions Rise of Gru, is what I call a cinematic masterpiece if you're a 7-year-old kid. I love this movie from start to finish, but it felt like something was ultimately missing. I'm still not quite sure what was missing, but I think there's just a little bit more that I was hoping for. One of my favorite parts of the movie wasn't even to do with the movie itself. It was the gentle Minions trend where people would dress up in suits and go to the movie. That was awesome. Me personally, I wish I participated, but I don't own a suit yet, so I will be wearing a suit to the Barbie movie though. But for the Minions movie, I ultimately didn't have a suit for that. And that was one of my favorite parts of the movie, was just that. I hope Minions 3 can improve on the film. And while, like I said, it did have me smiling from start to finish, it just felt basic and just like another generic kids film. Going into 2023, Doctor Strange the Multiverse of Madness was actually my most anticipated film of the year. But it fell way flatter than I had expected. I expected it to be a top 3 movie of the year, no doubt, nothing above it, top 3 for sure. And it ended up not even cracking my top 15, which was very surprising. I do respect what Sam Raimi was trying to do with it, but it just didn't turn out well. And I didn't really like America Chavez. I think it was more the acting from Xochitl Gomez, and I think that was more due to the lazy script that had left me disappointed with her performance, and not as much her as an actress. And on top of that, I think they just relied too heavily on the cameos and thought that would carry the movie, which ultimately, if that's all you're relying on for your movie, you don't have a good movie there, and they were not able to capitalize on the cameos as much as they had hoped. In a year with many unpleasant surprises with some lackluster films I thought would be good, Smile was one that was actually the reverse of that. I didn't think it would be that good, but it was actually much better than I thought it would be. A new horror film, which is a genre I actually didn't even get into until this year, with this actually being my first horror film that I had ever seen. I'm not too sure why I wasn't into the genre before that, but I certainly am into it now after watching Smile. The cast was fairly unknown, and they came together to create a new original idea, and the ending that they had sets it up perfectly for a sequel. Now, do I hope they do a sequel? Kinda, but also I don't think it will do as well as the first one did, just because the sequels of these horror films are never quite the same as the first, and it doesn't leave you feeling the exact same way as the first one did. But if this is just a standalone film, that's 2 thumbs up from me. Now, another film which pleasantly surprised me, Ticket to Paradise. It stars George Clooney and Julia Roberts in a rom-com setting, which is a setting where I wasn't sure how well they would do together. And ultimately, I also wasn't sure how much I would enjoy a rom-com film. I think this might have been the first rom-com I've ever seen. I'm trying to think of any other ones that I've seen, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. And they were great together in this film. The premise behind it was great, and if you add on their performances and the other actors' performances, it gives you one of my favorite surprises from the entire year in the film industry. Sonic 2 was a movie I was very excited for, and when I left the theater, the excitement stayed with me. It was the perfect follow-up to the original Sonic film, and I was very excited when they had announced a Sonic 3 to be releasing. It's for sure one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, and turning this series not only into a movie, but now a trilogy, was a very good choice, and I am very excited for the future of Sonic, not just in movies, not just in video games, but in all of it. All of Sonic, and what they're able to do with this franchise is going to be awesome. Babylon is a movie that seems to be very polarizing, where people either love it or they hate it. I am leaning more towards the side of loving it, but if we're basing the ranking based on just the first 2 hours, for sure, 9 out of 10, no doubt. But unfortunately, it really falls off in about the last hour or so. There was no need. This movie did not need to be over 3 hours. It was much drawn out at the end. That ending, the last 30 minutes wasn't even really needed. And unfortunately, that's what ends up hindering its ranking. The comedy I found to be amazing. I thought the acting was great. The cinematography was beautiful. Chazelle, he's a great director, and it was another well done film. But easily, there's 30 minutes of footage they could have got rid of, and it would have been the exact same film, exact same story, exact same premise. Nothing changes if they get rid of these 30 minutes of footage. And also, I just found there to be way too much unneeded nudity in this film. It was too much. It was too much. Jackass Forever is actually the first Jackass movie I've seen, and I don't think I've laughed more while watching a movie than while I was watching this. It was hilarious from start to finish, and the boys all came together to create a real masterpiece and what I would say is probably the best Jackass film yet. I didn't know what to really expect when going into Strange World, but I never should have doubted what Disney could really do with animation, and this proved it. It was a beautiful film from start to finish, not only with the animation, but also with the story. The storytelling was done perfectly, and I think that the message behind the movie was beautiful. They told it perfect, and while walking out of the theater, it left me smiling and very pleased with what they had done with this film. Now, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is actually my favorite animated movie of all of 2022, the entire year. The newest animated movie that I've seen is also my favorite from the year. And I just thought it was a huge surprise. I did not think I'd have it this high, but I was completely blown away when I saw it. I thought the animation style was perfect, given that it's the telling of fairy tales, so you can kind of tell the different animation styles that they used, I thought that was pretty clever. And I also liked the message behind the film. It was more like live your life, don't let death overcome you or anything, and just focus on the life you have now. And I think that it was a really well told message, and that is ultimately what's made it my favorite animated film from this year. Bullet Train is an incredibly done action film and was another massive surprise from this year. All these films that I didn't think would do good were massive surprises, and all these ones I thought would be good were massive letdowns. It's kind of funny how that works out. I thought that all of the casting choices behind this film were great, and I thought that the actors also did a very good job in their roles. I think that Lemon and Tangerine were carrying the comedy throughout this entire film, and the third act was completely unexpected as to what would happen, and it ultimately created one of my favorite surprises of the year and one of my favorite theater experiences of the year. Glass Onion was another huge surprise for me. You're going to be hearing me say huge surprise a lot. It was the ultimate mystery film with an ending that, me personally, I found very surprising. I thought that the twist in the film was very crazy, and it was also very unexpected. I may not be the biggest fan of Rian Johnson just after what happened with the Star Wars and everything, but he made a damn good movie here. Unfortunately, there is a flaw with this movie which has hindered its ranking just a little, and I thought that the acting was not as top tier as I had hoped. It had a stacked cast, but me personally, I was disappointed with the acting. That's just me. I don't know. I haven't seen anyone else complaining about the acting, but with the high tier cast they had, the acting should have been up here, and I felt it was more around here. Violent Night will be a classic Christmas movie for many years to come. Another cool thing is it was actually filmed in my hometown of Winnipeg, which is really cool. And I believe David Harbour, he was the perfect casting choice for this edition of Santa. The only negative I have with it would be it being a kind of Die Hard knockoff, but more Christmassy, if you know what I'm saying. Because, well, Die Hard is a Christmas movie and is my favorite Christmas movie. It's not super Christmas-esque, if you know what I'm saying. But if you ignore that and go into it just as its own film, don't think about Die Hard or anything, you'll love this movie and all of its comedy, and it is going to be a movie I watch every year come Christmas time. Austin Butler, he deserves an Oscar for his performance as Elvis. This was by far my favorite acting performance of the year, and I thought that the telling of the story was perfect. Tom Hanks was also the perfect supporting actor and may also receive an Oscar nomination for that, for his telling of Colonel Tom Parker. And this movie also helped me understand Elvis and his story more, and I also developed a greater appreciation for Elvis himself as a person and as a musician. Seeing all the struggles that he went through throughout his life, it's just kind of crazy how, like, fame isn't all that it's choked up to. Fame isn't all that you think it will be. It's not as positive as you may think. And this kind of shows off that, and thought that it was a very good telling of the story of Elvis. Another Steven Spielberg masterpiece. Fabelmans may go down as just the most underappreciated film of this year. It's loosely based off of Spielberg's childhood, and it tells the story of his life perfectly and how he got into films and directing. And without Spielberg, my love of movies wouldn't be kind of where it is today. He is one of my favorite directors of all time, top 3 favorite directors. Him, James Cameron, who we'll see later on in this list, and Christopher Nolan, my 3 favorite directors of all time. Any movie that they come out with, I will most likely go be seeing in the theater. But to get back to the underappreciated part, this movie did under $15 million at the box office, which for a Spielberg film heavily surprised me. But I also didn't see a ton of marketing for it or anything. And I think that so many people will miss out on this great movie just because they haven't heard of it or they're not really interested in the story. Because so many people are just going for action movies or continuation stories. If you're releasing a new film that isn't an action movie, you're kind of asking for it to just not do good, which is a really sad truth. Black Adam is one that I was expecting to be more Love and Thunder tier of superhero movies, but it actually ended up being one of my favorites of 2022. And not just one of my favorites of 2022, but one of my favorite comic book films in general. The Rock, I believe he was the perfect choice to play Black Adam, and I thought the story was beautifully done, the way they told it. The one part that I don't like is now with the recent announcement by James Gunn regarding the Henry Cavill situation, the post-credit scene is pretty much irrelevant, and there's no point in really having it. And now they've also said that Black Adam's not really going to be part of the DCU anymore. So what was the point of this film? Was there really any point of it now? That's really the only negative I have against it. Okay, now this, spoiler alert, this is my big surprise of 2022. I ended up leaving the theater with tears just running down my face, which that's a sign of a good movie. I thought that Jim Parsons was very good as Michael, but I do believe they should have chose a different actor for the role, just because I can't really see Jim Parsons in this kind of role. I see him more as a comedy guy, Sheldon Cooper, Big Bang Theory, if you may. And it's not quite the role he's suited for. But overall, the acting, the story, and the cinematography created a beautiful love story and the biggest surprise from 2022. The Batman is the perfect Batman movie. Almost. While Robert Pattinson was a great choice as Batman and is a top 3 Batman in my opinion, they made the movie more of a detective style Batman, which I thought was a great change of scenery for once. But there is a negative with this movie, and that being the length. The last 15 minutes felt very drawn out, and during that I kept on thinking just, okay, this is the end, and then it wasn't the end, and I just felt like they could have ended it much sooner. Now, going into 2022, Everything Everywhere All at Once was actually a movie I didn't really have a lot of interest in, which is really surprising due to the genre of films I'm usually into. But after hearing nothing but praise about it, I knew I had to check it out, and I am really glad that I did. I actually kept falling asleep while watching it, and it actually took me 4 nights to finish, but it wasn't due to the fact that it was a bad film. I was just really tired and just kept falling asleep, and I'd wake up and be really disappointed and be like, shit, I fell asleep again and again and again. And after those 4 nights, I was very happy. The acting in the movie was top tier, and I think that Michelle Yeoh might win an Oscar for this film for her portrayal in this film. I also thought that the cinematography was perfect, and I think this is the perfect multiverse film. And I'm very pleased with saying that. Wakanda Forever was dealt a terrible hand, with their lead actor passing away well into the writing of the script. They had to film during a pandemic, and the lead actress, from what I've heard at least, refused the vaccine and everything, which helped cause more delays. But after all of this, they ended up creating an absolutely beautiful movie. I thought it was a beautiful tribute to Chadwick Boseman as well, and it continued the story of Black Panther in the MCU in a way that I didn't think they'd be able to after the passing of Chadwick Boseman. Now, the No Way Home More Fun Stuff version is a movie that I debated on even if I included in this list, but it was 13 minutes of extra footage, and for that, I believe it needs to be included. While the additional footage doesn't add more to the story, it was nice to see, and I was very pleased that they released this. And as you guys know, This was my #1 comic book film of 2022. Now, Top Gun Maverick was actually my #1 movie of the year until just a few weeks ago. This movie was better than the first and was the perfect way to follow up the original Top Gun. It was great to see the original cast members still perform well, and Miles Teller has sure made an even bigger name for himself with this. I thought that the action sequences were incredible, and Tom Cruise has shown once again why he's one of the top guys in Hollywood and why he's one of my favorite actors of all time, and they all came together to create a literal perfect film. But it wasn't as perfect as Avatar: The Way of Water, which is my favorite movie of 2022. This is by far the most visually stunning movie I've ever seen in my life, and James Cameron cements himself even further as one of the greatest directors of all time. Now, to fully appreciate this film, you must see it in the theater, you must see it in 3D. Everything just looks so real that you forget that most of it is actually CGI. All the avatars, it's CGI. Like the blue, everything, that's not makeup, that's not paint, nothing, that's all CGI. Which ultimately, because of all the CGI and how real it looks, you forget that it's CGI and you think that it's just real, which is very cool, but also kind of makes the CGI not as impressive just because you're not realizing that it's CGI. I thought that the story was beautiful as well, and me personally, I didn't even find it to feel like 3 hours. Like when it ended, I'm like, really? It's already been over 3 hours? And I thought that all of that combined was what made it the greatest movie of 2022. Please comment your list down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the movies that came out in 2022. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.